Ambiguity is a funny thing. In the wrong hands, it can easily be used as a crutch to replace a good story, interesting characters, and an alluring setting, and create a fragile illusion of sophistication and profundity that falls apart under the smallest amount of scrutiny. But if wielded correctly, a nebulous story filled with murky characters and mysterious motivations can bring a story to extreme heights that are only seen a handful of times in a decade, if that. Control doesn't quite get to that point. But thankfully, it steers far clear of the former, with its cryptic science fiction setting that largely pairs well with Remedy's take on some tried and true action RPG elements. As I stated, Control is a fairly unusual outing with its special blend of science fiction, action, and smidgens of horror here and there. The entire game takes place in a massive government compound that seems as boring and benign as your local library or DMV at first, but quickly becomes anything but. The characters, setting, and story are all as compelling as they are unusual, and while everything is mostly explained by the end, nothing in Control ever suffers from that demystification that many other games struggle with while their stories unfold. This is a testament to Remedy's top-notch storytelling and character development skills. Now, I won't go much deeper into the story of Control, as I feel most of the joy of it is derived from exploring it yourself, but rest assured, if you've been craving something fresh and fascinating in this genre, Control is definitely worth a look. All of the characters are done well, but I particularly enjoyed Jessie and her inner monologues portrayed with those ultra-tight shots on her eyes, and how well written those scenes were. A clear evolution of the also excellent technique Remedy deployed in the Max Payne games, where Max would admonish himself and those around him inside of his own head. It was also nice to hear Max Payne's voice actor in a new, albeit strikingly similar role.
She sees right through me. She knows I don't like relying on people. The only person you should fail is yourself.
I also really liked Emily. Seeing somebody so excited about protocol and dry bureaucratic statutes and guidelines was really endearing.
A janitor let me in. I love it. This is fucking unbelievable. I can't even.
Just about everybody you interact with is well thought out though. Nobody felt weak or pointless. Fortunately, Remedy didn't phone the rest of the game in either. While the narrative elements and world building are definitely Control's strongest suit, the gameplay and presentation are also realized with considerable, albeit varying degrees of success. All the basic gameplay elements of the action-adventure genre are here, and while they all work as intended, I do want to underline the word basic. The combat, file collecting, leveling Jessie up, weapon mods, personal mods, side missions, you get the idea. All of that stuff is here and it works, although there's almost nothing here that you haven't already seen in action-adventure games over the last 10 years. That being said, all of it is tied together very nicely in clean menus that couldn't be any easier on the eyes, and I really appreciate that. Seems like a small thing, but I feel like action-adventure games have gone off the deep end with their menus lately, and it's nice to see that this game kept everything under control in that regard. One thing I will mention, however, is the navigation system itself. I do appreciate that the map can be displayed on top of real-time gameplay, which is another trend I'd like to see return, but the map itself isn't as useful as I would like it to be. It's hard to tell exactly what floor certain spots are referring to, since it's a flat map trying to illustrate areas with sometimes several layers of depth, and the whole thing would have really benefited from some on-screen objective markers. I was pretty much always able to read between the lines and figure out what I needed to do, but it would have been nice to not have to do that. Whatever immersion they were trying to preserve by not having real-time waypoints on the screen was lost anyway every time I had to do laps around an area trying to figure out what the map was trying to tell me. I wouldn't call it a major issue, but it's hard not to be a little frustrated with it in light of so many things that the game got right. Very few things can interrupt the flow of a game as badly as having no idea where to go. The combat, on the other hand, is over-the-top fun and borderline perfect. The shooting, close-range melee attacks, being able to telekinetically throw almost any object in your vicinity with brutal force makes every combat area feel like a playground. And that only gets better as you unlock more abilities and more slots for mods to further nudge Jesse toward your own personal playstyle. Personally, I really gravitate towards the shotgun-style weapon. I think it's called Shatter. That thing is awesome. While most of the mods aren't fundamentally unique ideas, using them can be downright exhilarating since this game has some of the best visual and audio feedback I've ever seen in a game like this. Combat isn't the only area where the visual and sound design stands out, but it is definitely where Control flexes its style the most, and that elevates the game's action up to a level that stands above the majority of other games in the genre, in my opinion. Controlling Jesse is very snappy and nimble, which feels a little weird at the beginning when the game is relatively slow and quiet, but it makes perfect sense once everything heats up. Instead of feeling very realistic like, say, Joel does in The Last of Us, Jesse feels more like Lara Croft from the new Tomb Raider games, maybe even snappier than that. And once you get through a few of the combat and platforming sections, you'll be glad she does. Being able to leap out of danger and climb up the side of a railing to a staircase to get behind cover quickly is very nice, and I'm really glad they went with that style for Jesse. Most reviews that I've seen for this game have brought up the fact that Control isn't the most well-optimized game ever made, and it tends to stutter during intense moments, but honestly, I've encountered very little of this on PS4, and the few frame rate drops that I have seen resolved themselves pretty quickly. So I would agree with that criticism, but unless you're super sensitive to that type of thing, I wouldn't say it's as much of an issue as many others have. I also think it's important to factor in that the destructibility in this game is much more detailed and dynamic than most. So those few frame rate drops that we do get, to me, are a more than fair price to pay for that. Every year we see several outstanding action-adventure games get released, and most games in this genre seem to either favor story and characters or gameplay and combat. And there's nothing really wrong with leaning one way or the other necessarily, but it's also nice to see the few games that do pop up every once in a while that seem to nail both. Control is one of those games. It stops short of reinventing the wheel in terms of its fundamental elements, but it unquestionably produces some of the best versions of those elements that I've ever seen. Outside of a skimpy navigation system and a couple other very small gripes, Control is just an excellent gaming experience, but more importantly, it raises the bar for the genre with its grasp on tight gameplay, a fascinating story, and almost everything else in between.